Let me open up Maya, and we're going to go through the entire process. Maya. Some of the basics of, all the basics of modeling, again, I'll go over. How to set your project folder, basically from start to finish, all the major things that you need to know how to do. I'm recording it. I'll post it to Canvas as a reference for you. Okay. Okay, so we have, again, just to reiterate, we are in the Maya Classic workspace. There's the channel box editor, modeling toolkit, attribute editor on this side. We have our viewport, which is our 3D scene. We have the grid in the center, which just orients where 0, 0 is in the virtual space. You do not have to stay within the bounds of this grid by any means. It's only a tool for reference for scale and such. Over here we have our outliner and we have our tool settings. If you don't see the outliner, you can click this button, and the outliner is a list, a running list of all the objects that you have in your scene. And your tool settings here, if you don't see this, you can double click on any of the tools on the left hand side here and this will pop up. Okay, we want to be working in modeling menu set. And all of these menu sets will change what tools that we have available to us in our top toolbar. And we are going to be working primarily with polygon modeling, right? And so this is all the primitives here that we have to work with. I'm going to open up our modeling toolkit here. There are 4 different modes you can work in: object mode, face mode, edge mode, and vertice mode. And then this is UVs, which we might get to some things with UVs. So just like we need some material in our scene whenever we model, I'm going to populate my scene with a cube. And here are my select tools. And then everything that I do to manipulate the shape is by moving, rotating, or scaling the whole object or any one of its components. So I can right-click on the object and choose which mode I want to work in, or I can go up here in the modeling toolkit. This little tab on the side for modeling toolkit, that's also this button up here. Before I get started doing anything in my scene, I want to go to File and I want to set my project folder. So I'm going to create a new folder if I haven't created one already, and I'm going to call this Maya Demo. And I want to make sure that I'm in a particular folder that makes sense. In this case, I'm in my course folder for this semester in our class folder here, and I'm going to call this Maya Demo, and I'm going to set my project to that folder, and then I'm going to create a default workspace. After I've done that, I'm going to go File, and I'm going to say Project Window, and this will populate that project folder with all of the default folders that we'll need to organize anything that's necessary for our scene. For example, if I have sounds I want to put into it, if I have source images that I want to use as textures, they would go in this folder. All of my scenes end up saving to the scenes folder, and all of my rendered images my image sequence, which then we bring into Premiere to create the animation as a moving image, they get populated here in this images folder. So I'm just going to say accept. Okay, so that's ready to go, and then I'm going to say File, Save Scene As, and then you'll see it's here in my new project folder in my Scenes folder. So I'm going to say maybe today's date or Invisible Cities. You can name it, whatever you want to name it, and just say Save As. And then always you'll get this dialog box, but don't worry about it. It's just saying this is a student version of this program. Just continue. Okay, so now I'm ready to model. So what I can do to model is populate my scene with, again, these poly primitives to start. And then I want to add basically resolution to it, but in the form of different divisions. So adding points, which then translate to edges and new faces in order to manipulate this form. So some of the hotkeys that we want to be aware of are Q for select, W to move, E to rotate, and R to scale. And we have this little key down here that tells us which our axis orientation we're in, and it correlates to these colors. X is red, Z is blue, and Y is green, and then the middle for scale, anyway, we'll scale something uniformly. Okay, so I can scale this guy up. I can also add divisions to it. I can add divisions in a number of ways. Some of those ways are here in my modeling toolkit. I can add divisions, right? And this will uniformly divide this particular cube up into a number of segments. So let me go ahead and show you that, right? If I'm dividing it up one time, then I'm basically adding 4 faces to every side. So this is a way that you can generally or globally add a lot of definition, but keep in mind that how we want to work with modeling is that we add a division where we want to make, or we add different vertices, edges, and faces where we want to be manipulating our like piece of virtual material. So if I want to we want to, again, we want to work broadly, and we want to kind of scale things up. We want to manipulate things with really kind of big, blocky moves first, and then we can go in and add increasing detail by adding more divisions this way. We also always want to maintain that faces have 4 sides, or 3 sides is fine, but any more than that and you're not going to get a correct you're going to get strange deformations. It's something that you can actually play with if you think it works well with the type of city that you're modeling. If you want to do something that's against physics, you can go ahead and play with some of these rules, but those are kind of the standard rules, as we want to keep things, all faces have 4 sides. So that's one way that I just hit Command Z to undo that. So that's one way that I can divide up this particular cube. Another way, and this is before I've done any manipulation to my polyprimitive object, is under here under my attribute editor. And again, these are the different nodes that are attached to this virtual object. So these are ways that you can access the information that's, packets of information, digital information about this particular object in the scene. And one of them, until you start to manipulate the internal characteristics of this model, it will give you this polycube tab. This will go away if I add divisions or extrude anything or do anything of that nature. But here I can also add subdivisions within my face if I want to, and I can set height, width, and depth here. So that's something to be aware of. Again, we have our kind of node that says this is an object in space, and here are its global coordinates. This node says it is a polygon shape. This one says right now it's a primitive cube, and you can modify it. And then we have a shading group saying it's going to need some kind of shader attached. And then we have the material tab, which is the shader itself. This material here is Lambert 1. This is the default material. Don't change any of the parameters within Lambert 1. You always want to add a new material to each object. You don't want to start messing with your default material. Lambert 1 is always the default. Okay. So if I want to add some divisions to this object, another way I can do that, these are the kind of mesh tools for editing. They're all up here in these 3 drop-down menus and everything that you can find here in the modeling toolkit. So a tool that I really like that's not in the modeling toolkit is this insert edge loop. And this is a way that you can specify just a particular edge. If I go to my tool settings, I'm going to undo that, Command Z. If I go to my tool settings, I can say relative distance from edge, and that will allow me to drop it in at a particular point that I kind of select from by just hovering over my object. So for example, if I want to have a shape where I want to put an edge here and then maybe scale that edge up, right? So I can do that. It allows me to do that without having to add a bunch of divisions that I don't need. I add one particular edge loop to my object. And you always want to work in loops because that's how you maintain 4 sides to every face. Okay, so I can do an edge loop like that. And if I choose my edge loop tool, the last tool I've used will populate here, right under my toolbar, so I can do it again. If I say multiple edge loops, I can say how many, and then they will it will place it. Doesn't matter. I can kind of hover at any spot over this object, but it's going to place it along the edge equidistant from the other edges. So if I want to put something dead center, I would use multiple edge loops, number of edge loops 1. That's the edge loop tool. All of the other tools are here. Some of them that are really helpful is something like Extrude. This is where I would maybe work in face mode. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose face mode here. And then you can see here that it's changed my component mode. And then I might say select this face and extrude, and what this will allow me to do is basically double up my faces, and then I can pull material out. This is something that's great if you want to, I don't know, there's so many different capabilities for this, versus selecting this face and moving it, I'm moving all the vertices with it. So that Extrude is a really powerful tool. And then we've gone over some of the other ones here, one of them being Boolean. This is how you can cut through objects by having two objects together. I'll show this to you one more time. Create a new cube. You can't see it because it's hidden, but let me scale it up and you'll see it, right? So if I select, let's say, maybe right click, go to object mode here, I'm going to select this object first and this object second and say Boolean, and I can say difference bool, right? And then that will cut a hole. It will interpret between those two objects a kind of operation, a Boolean operation to do.
Is that how you do Windows?
Yeah, you could do windows that way. Another way you could do windows is something like this, perhaps. Let's say you have a wall. It depends on how you're, I think that's one way that you could do it really easily. If you have a building, let's say, here's another way, maybe you can think about doing windows. Here's a building. Let me add a bunch of divisions to it, right? And then I can say face mode here and just select the faces that I want to be windows and just delete them,
Oh, okay.
right? That's another way that you can do it, but remember, with every object only has one face maintains texture or material information. So if you are only using this as a kind of prop for an exterior building, then I think this will work. I'm not sure if you would want to use this if you go into buildings and out of them. Remember, we're making a kind of set, not necessarily a realistic space. So if you want to animate something going inside this building and then outside of it, you're going to have to choose which side of each face you want to retain the material information. Otherwise, it's going to be really dark in here. Okay, but that's one way you could do windows. This is another way. Okay, so that's some of the modeling stuff that we've gotten to. Some other, we also had been talking about using soft selection, transform constraints, and symmetry. You can access that stuff under your tool settings here. Let me go ahead again and make a plane, because I think this is the best way to show you how to use soft selection. And you can use soft selection for anything. So soft selection just allows you, it's down here in your tool settings. It allows you to work in a component mode and choose a component, but then the components around it also get influenced by whatever you've done with that component. So let me increase this. It's based on a curve. You can change the shape of the curve, but just to show you the difference, this is what happens with soft selection, which is that I'm moving this one vertice, but I'm also moving the vertices around it within a particular kind of weight. Or if I turn that off, right, so it shows me here, if I turn off soft selection, I'm just selecting that one vertice and I'm only manipulating that one. So that's a good handy tool. Another one that's handy is remember changing the axis orientation of something. So if let's say I'm going to place a sphere in my scene, I'm going to hit F, will frame it up in my anything that I have selected. If I hit F, it will frame up the thing that I have selected. In this case, I want to go to object mode and choose this and say F, and now I've framed up my sphere here. But let's say I rotate this sphere. I'm going to hit E on my keyboard. If I rotate it, right, I can, and then I want to move it. I'm moving it now in the world space, orientation in world space, which means that I'm maintaining that Y is in the up direction according to the world, but I can also change this to be object. So now, or in relationship to the object, this is the Y axis of the object. So this is how I can manipulate, scale, rotate, or translate any object changing its axis orientation. So these are just ways that you're able to change, do operations, do kind of transform operations that might be specific to a particular direction. It's just really handy. Then another thing that I showed this to Rebecca. I don't know if I showed anybody else this tool, but for example, let's see, we were working with a cone. I'm going to frame up this cone. And let me go ahead and add in my modeling toolkit divisions. Maybe I don't want to do that. What we did was we want to add an edge loop around this cone. You want to add some more divisions to it. So it's kind of hard. Maya won't understand at this point how you want to resolve an edge loop around a point where a number of different edges are converging into one point. So for example, if I go to my edge loop tool here, like it's not going to know what to do. It's just going to drop one vertex here on this line. So I don't want to do that. A way around it is to select this face down here at the bottom. Make sure I have my soft selection off. So I'm going to select this face. I'm going to extrude it. Okay, maybe I will scale it out a little bit. To scale after you've extruded, I just click on any of these boxes if I want to scale uniformly. The middle one comes up and then I can scale uniformly. Okay, so that's a way that I've added maybe an edge in the center of this cone. So if I want to move this edge, let me go to my edge tool here. I can select by double clicking on an edge and that will select the whole loop. And so if I want to move this edge up, right, I can select the whole loop and move it, but it's going to retain its shape. There's another thing I can do, which is called a transform constraint here. I can turn this to edge or surface, and my edge will actually slide along the shape. And so it will scale down if it goes up, or scale up as it goes down this cone. So this is a way I can change the placement of edges. If I don't want to change the shape, but I just want to change what's called the topology, or the way that edges flow around your model, this is a way that you can do that. So those are some of the tool settings for some of the transform tools that I think are really helpful. Again, that's the transform constraint, that's soft selection. The last one that we didn't talk about is symmetry settings. Symmetry settings let you turn on based on the object's axis orientation or the world orientation, so that you're able to select, let's go to my vertex mode here now, and maybe go to the bottom, and you can see that I'm selecting points that are opposite each other along whatever that axis is, and then the operation will mimic itself from one side to the other. So if you have something symmetrical that you're making, this is maybe a really great way that you don't have to do everything twice. You could just do it once. Okay, so those are some of our modeling. Those are all the basics for modeling. Let me delete all my objects in my scene. I can do that by going to my outliner. What we see here is there has been some transform nodes that have populated here because I've done some operations like Boolean operations to these objects, and then I have all my objects listed. I can double click on any of these and say building 1. I can change the name of them so I know what I'm looking at in my scene. That's super helpful. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select, shift select everything in my outliner and just delete it, so I have a blank workspace again.